All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the general knowledge questions from the SSC MTS exam, specifically the third shift on February 18th. So, what can these questions tell us about how to prep for what's coming next? Let's find out. The biggest takeaway right off the bat is that this exam is changing. It's evolving. The pattern just isn't as predictable as it used to be. We're seeing all the familiar topics, sure, but they're mixed in with some real curveballs. And that's exactly why understanding these recent questions is more critical than ever for your preparation. So, let's kick things off with geography and environment. Even in a core subject like this one, we're starting to see some pretty interesting new patterns emerge. First up, we've got a classic question type. Namdapha National Park. The answer, of course, is Arunachal, Pradesh. This is pretty standard stuff for most aspirants, right? A good little warm-up. But then we get a question like this: the location of Tuticorin port in Tamil Nadu. Now, what's so interesting here is that specific questions about ports aren't really that common. This could be a signal of a new focus on things like national infrastructure and trade. It's a wake-up call that just relying on the old revision lists probably not going to be enough anymore. And here we have the Chhatrapati Shivaji Terminus in Mumbai. The crucial detail here isn't just that it's in Mumbai, but that it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You see? That adds a whole other layer of importance and kind of shows you why certain landmarks get picked over others. Let's see how this trend plays out in our next section: history, culture, and arts. The theme here is definitely digging deeper because, wow, these questions demand a much more specific level of knowledge. So we start with ancient Indian philosophy. The questions about Adi Shankara's philosophy, which is Advaita Vedanta. This goes way beyond just knowing simple historical events. We're getting into core philosophical concepts now. Okay, this next question really hammers home the level of detail they're looking for. It's not just about knowing who Maharaja Ranjit Singh was. They wanted the exact date of his passing, June 27th, 1839. This shows a big shift from knowing general timelines to actually memorizing very specific dates. Now, moving into culture, we've got the Madai festival from Chhattisgarh. This is actually the first of several questions we saw that show a really heavy focus on specific regional festivals and dances. And following that trend, here's the Chupali dance, a traditional folk dance all the way from Nagaland. Now keep this one in mind as we look at the very next slide. And boom, here's the lava dance, which comes from Lajpat, another folk dance question, but from a totally different corner of the country. Are you starting to see a pattern here? So here's the crucial point, the big insight. Questions on folk dances and festivals are clearly a high priority topic, but, and this is a big but, they aren't the common ones you see on every single list. The examiners are picking new, sometimes pretty obscure examples, which honestly means if a question feels difficult for you, it's probably difficult for everyone else too. All right, let's move into science and technology. The questions here were a real mix, testing everything from fundamental principles to your knowledge of India's recent achievements. Here's a very straightforward question from core physics. Newton's first law of motion is, of course, also known as the law of inertia. This is a foundational concept that really anyone preparing for general science should know cold. So we go from classical physics right into space science. The orbital time period of a geostationary satellite is 24 hours. It matches the Earth's rotation. This just goes to show you need to be comfortable with concepts from satellite technology. And speaking of space, this question is so key. The confirmation of water on the moon, that came from India's very own Chandrayaan-1 mission. This highlights a recurring theme. You absolutely positively must know the details of India's major ISRO missions. All right, next up is books and authors, another topic that comes up a lot. And the exam covered both historical works and some very recent literature. First, a classic, Unhappy India. This historical book was penned by the freedom fighter Lala Lajpat Rai, which makes it a must-know piece of modern Indian history. And to balance out that classic, we get a contemporary one. Gun Island is by the acclaimed author Amitav Ghosh. See, this shows you can't just study historical authors. You've got to be aware of major modern literary figures too. So, we've seen the questions, we've broken them down. Now for the most important part. How do we turn all this analysis into a concrete plan for revision? Let's get into the actionable insights. First, let's talk economy. The questions really suggest you need to be sharp on some specific data points. You've got to keep an eye on foreign direct investment, FDI, and the gross domestic product, or GDP, figures for 2024 and 2025. Like this slide shows, you should specifically be tracking which state is getting the most FDI and what those national GDP targets are. Okay, this slide basically pulls it all together into a strategic checklist. Number 1, master the 5-year plans. Number 2, know the key details of ISRO's missions. No excuses. 3, study both historical and major contemporary authors. 4, get really comfortable with that economic data. And finally, number 5, like we saw, dig deeper into culture. Go way beyond the common folk dances and festivals you already know. So we'll end with a question for you to think about. After seeing this entire breakdown of what's actually being asked on the exam, what is the one single thing you're going to change in your study plan starting today?